The first ping came just past midnight, cutting through the static like a voice half remembered from a dream. "Doctor." Mara Ellis froze, her headphones tight against her ears, as the signal repeated, rhythmic, deliberate, almost human. The lake outside her cabin was a dark mirror under the storm, reflecting flashes of lightning that made the world blink in fragments. Ethan said, "It's interference," Mara whispered. "No. It's speaking." The air smelled of wet metal, humming faintly, as though the storm itself carried the pulse. Her screen displayed repeating waveforms that didn't match any geological or biological source. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered, "Someone built this." A sudden surge fried half her instruments, the lights flickered, and the cabin fell into half-darkness. From the window, a faint glow shimmered beneath the lake's surface. Deep, blue, alive. The water rippled though there was no wind, and Mara's fear turned into resolve. She grabbed her recorder and said, "If it's calling, I'm answering." Then, through the headphones, the signal changed. A soft voice formed her name. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving mist crawling across Blackwater Lake. Mara replayed the signal on a backup device, each pulse echoing in her chest like a second heartbeat. Ethan said, "We should leave this to the university." She shook her head, eyes fixed on the waveform. "They'll bury it," she said softly. The hum still lingered in the air, faint but steady, as though the earth itself was remembering. Outside, a crow landed on the wet dock, cawing once before silence swallowed it. Mara stared at the reflection of the cabin lights on the lake. They trembled, as if disturbed from below. "It's not interference," she said. "It's a reply." At the old library, dust hung in narrow beams of sunlight as Mara sifted through brittle research logs. The earliest mention of the lake's anomalies dated back 50 years, seismic readings that didn't match any tectonic movement. Ethan said, "Someone erased half of this data." Mara frowned, or never wanted it found. The page smelled of damp ink, letters smudged by time. A sketch of concentric circles near the lake's center caught her eye, labeled "Source." Her pulse quickened. From the corner, an old reel-to-reel recorder clicked on by itself. Night returned with heavy clouds. Mara replayed the old tapes she found, the crackling sound weaving with the same rhythmic tone from her recording. Ethan muttered, "That's impossible." Her hands trembled slightly as she said, "Someone heard it before us." The lake outside was still, yet the sound felt alive, creeping through the wood of the cabin walls. "It's repeating because it remembers," she whispered. The window pane quivered lightly, and for a fleeting second, a shape moved beneath the surface. Large, slow, deliberate. Just before midnight, the signal returned stronger, shaking loose objects from the shelves. Mara stumbled, headphones clamped over her ears, as the voice whispered clearer than before. "Find the source." Ethan pulled the plug, shouting, "It's not human." She turned to him, eyes wide, and said, "Then what is it?" The wide cabin lights flickered one last time before going completely dark. Only the glow under the lake remained, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat waiting to be answered. Sirens wailed across the lake road as Mara ran, breath sharp, backpack thumping, rain starting again like needles on skin. The signal roared in her headset, louder and faster, a countdown she could feel in her bones. Ethan said, "Bullets are moving on the far shore," she said. Then they heard it too. Headlights cut the fog and swept the trees, turning trunks into bars that slid across her path. A drone buzzed low, red light scanning, and she flinched, anger rising with fear. Ethan said, "We should hide the gear," she said. "If we hide, we lose the trail." Gravel crunched near the dock, voices low. "Careful, train. The water answered with a deep pulse, and ripples hit the pilings like a drumline. Ethan said, "Who are they with?" she said. "Not us." A wave broke against the ramp, and the drone tilted toward the glow. The signal shifted pitch, then resolved into coordinates. They ducked beneath the old boathouse, wood smelling of oil and algae, the lake slapping slow under the slats. For a moment the sirens faded, replaced by the small sounds of water and breath. Ethan said, "You're shaking," she said. "I'm listening." The headset crackled with a softer rhythm now, like a lullaby hidden in code. She pressed her thumb to the recorder and felt the throb answer her pulse. "It's guiding," she whispered. Ethan leaned close, face pale in the gloom, and said, "Or luring." Wind moved a loose chain and it tapped the piling like a metronome. She thought of the erased logs and the old tape that knew this music. The calm felt staged, like the quiet in a lab before the test begins. "If we don't follow," she said, "they will." A pale shape slid below and vanished. By noon the town pier filled with watchers, their talk clipped, their eyes on the water as if waiting for a cue. A black SUV idled near the ramp, windows dark, engine smooth like a held breath. A tall man stepped out, posture calm, smile thin, and the crowd made space without being told. Ethan said, "That's Conrad." She said nothing, but her heart kicked the dockboards. Professor Val's voice carried without strain as he said, "Dangerous toys in this weather." She said, "It's data," he said, "it's liability." The signal hushed, as if obeying him, then returned softer, like a child behind a door. He looked at her recorder and said, "Hand it over, Dr. Ellis." Control hung in the air like static. The pier groaned. She smiled back and said, "Make me." His eyes warmed, and that was worse than a threat. They retreated up the hill to the Abbey ruins where wind carried the smell of sage and old stone. Bells long gone left an echo that still seemed to ring in the arches. A woman in gray waited beside a mossy well, eyes bright, hands folded, as if listening to something deeper than wind. Ethan said, "Sister Helena." She said, "You kept the tapes." The sister nodded, then pressed a small tin to Mara's palm. Inside lay a coil of wire and a broken badge. Before they sealed the shaft, the sister said, "A boy heard the lake sing and never slept again." The story stuck like a burr in Mara's chest. "Why help me?" she asked. The sister said, "Because truth rots in closed rooms." Clouds thinned and a narrow band of light crossed the hill, like a finger tracing a path. "Follow when the pulse slows," the sister said, "not when it shouts." Dusk gathered as they hauled the skiff onto the dark water, motors off, oars silent to keep their approach clean. Mara matched her strokes to the slow pulse, counting the rests the sister taught. Ethan said, "If Conrad tracks us, we're done." She said, "Then we get there first." The coordinates drew a path across the lake like stitches closing an old wound. Wind flattened the surface, and the glow returned, faint and steady, exactly where the map had no depth. Guilt flickered when she thought of the boy who never slept. Fear followed, but so did purpose. "We opened the shaft," she said. "Tonight?" Ethan said. "Without permission?" She said. "Without permission." The pulse dropped one step lower, like a door unlatching underwater, and the skiff drifted over a circle of darker blue. The lake was calm at noon, sunlight pulling silver threads across the surface, and for a moment the town forgot to worry. Mara watched the ripples and let her shoulders drop, the headset quiet in her hands. A woman approached with careful steps and a camera bag that looked too clean for this place. Lila Moreau said, "I study patterns, not people." Mara said, "I study both when I must." Lila smiled as if sharing a private joke and laid out a small spectrum analyzer that caught the faintest tones. Ethan said, Who sent you? Lila said. A friend who likes your work, but hates your methods. The analyzer drew a ladder of soft peaks, matching the old tapes by shape, if not by pitch. Mara felt relief, then a pinch of doubt, like gravel in a shoe. The calm broke when a gull cried once and fell silent, as if warned. They took refuge in the boat shed where the air smelled of rope and varnish, and a thin beam of light cut the dust like a blade. Lila leaned over the recorder, her voice low, and even showing Mara how to phase match the harmonics that kept drifting. Lila said, "You're close, but the lake is detuning you," Mara said. "Then tune me back." Ethan watched their hands move in sync until his shoulders eased. Lila said, "I know a back channel to the old marina servers." Mara said, "You knew about the shaft." Lila's eyes flicked to the door and back, quick as a flinch. Ethan said, "We share or we stop." Lila said, "Share, of course." The beam shifted as clouds passed, and a small brass hook on the wall swung with no breeze. It made a tick that did not match the pulse. At the lakeside cafe, the generator hummed and cups clinked like nervous teeth while a storm gathered far off. Professor Vale stood by the counter, composed as always, speaking softly to a clerk who nodded too quickly. Conrad Vale said, "Curiosity grows like mold when rooms are damp." Mara said, "Light cures mold," he said. "Not if the spores live in you." Lila angled her chair to watch the door, calm face, restless fingers. Ethan said, "We have what we need." Conrad said, "You have what I allow." His words felt like pressure on the ribs, steady and cold. He paid for their coffee without asking and smiled as if he owned the table. The lights dipped once, and the hum rose half a step, like a hand closing around a throat. Rain arrived in a sheet as they reached the marina office, the hallway smelling of damp carpet and old wires. Lila worked a panel with quick confidence, and the door to the server room clicked open like a secret clearing its throat. Lila said, 2 minutes, copy and go." Mara said, "No deletes." Ethan stood guard, boots squeaking on tile, counting breaths. The monitor showed the live array map and a hidden log that matched the boys' dates from the sisters' story. Relief rose, then shattered when the outside door locked with a firm metal kiss. Conrad's voice came through the intercom, warm as tea. Conrad Vale said, "Thank you for gathering my strays," Mara said. Lila said nothing. The progress bar jumped to 90 and froze. Silence pressed in after the intercom clicked off, and only the rain filled the gaps where trust had been. Mara felt the sting travel from chest to throat, then settle into a steady burn that sharpened her focus. Ethan said, "We trapped," she said. "Then we changed the rules." She pulled the coil Sister Helena gave her and bridged 2 test points, and the rack sighed like tired lung. Lila said, "That will wipe the cache." Mara said, "Only the lies." Sparks snapped once and the lock buzzed low, a tired animal thinking about sleep. The progress bar slid to complete, and a single folder named Aurora appeared. Mara swallowed, steadying her hands. "We go down the shaft," she said. Ethan said, "Even after this," she said, "especially after this." Silence held after the server room, a soft vacuum where rain once shouted, and Mara let the hush pass through her like cold smoke. The file named Aurora waited, patient, inevitable. Ethan said, "You don't owe anyone this," she said. "I owe the truth." The hallway smelled of wet dust and copper, a ghost of storms in the wiring. Betrayal left a bruise that thought could not reach, but work could. She pieced the nights together, the erased logs, the boy who never slept, the glow that pulsed like memory. Screens came alive with a low blue that felt like moonlight under a door. Her fingers hovered, then pressed play. The first tone matched the lake, and her heart beat, 2 pendulums finding each other in the dark. Ethan said, If this shows what I think, we don't come back, she said. We go forward. The clip began with a breath, and the breath knew her name. The recording opened on a flooded corridor, boots splashing, radios whispering, the year stamp flickering at the edge like a failing candle. A woman's voice said, Array 3 realigned to the basalt seam. Another voice answered, Aurora, pull back. And metal cried somewhere deep. The smell of brine and ozone seemed to leak from the speaker, salt on the tongue of memory. Mara's present folded into their past as the tone rose, clean and sorrowful, like a choir cut to one note. Aurora Pike said, It isn't natural, it's nested. A door slammed, footsteps ran, and the clip jittered into a still of concentric circles bolted to rock. Ethan said, They tuned the lake, Mara said. They made it sing. The last seconds were only breath, close to the mic and a soft apology meant for someone who would never hear it. The frame froze on a timestamp that matched the boys' first sleepless night. They took the skiff to the circle where the pulse sat like a patient drum, and dusk thinned pewter, as if the sky were holding its breath. Mara lowered a hydrophone until the line hummed against her palm. I hear the door, she whispered. Ethan said, or the lock. Steps sounded on the pier behind them, measured, unhurried, and Conrad's reflection arrived on the water before his voice. Conrad Vale said, You open what you cannot close, she said. You closed what was never yours. The pause between pulses stretched until her own breathing grew loud in her head. Heartbeat, breath, tone, 3 metronomes fighting for time. She pictured Aurora's circles on basalt and saw a shape in the math that looked like invitation. It's a relay, she said. Conrad said nothing, and his silence landed like a verdict. The pulse dropped, and her fear snapped into sight. Conrad spoke like a teacher, uncoiling a proof. Gentle, precise, merciless. Conrad Vale said, We listened first, then we echoed. Then we learned the cadence that kept the lake from cracking itself apart. She said, You built a cage. He said, We built a lullaby. He stepped closer. Shoes quiet on wet boards. People sleep because of it, he said. So the town lives. The words rang clean and rotten at once, good dressed in necessity. Ethan said, At whose cost? Conrad's smile held math and grief. One program, one array, one loss we could measure, he said. Aurora understood. The lake answered with a soft thud like a heavy book set down. Doubt broke over Mara and ran off again, leaving a hard shore. She looked past him to the dark water and saw how a solution can be a wound if it fails, she said. You fail with it, he said. We all do. Mara let the truth settle like silt, then cleared the water with one breath and a choice she had been walking toward for years without seeing it. The array was a song, and the song had become law. But law is not mercy. Ethan said, Say it, she said. We take it offline long enough to prove the lake stands without a leash. Fear rose, carrying the boy's sleepless eyes and Aurora's last apology. And then fear bent into purpose. She felt small and steady, a wire pulled tight between 2 posts. Lila's absence weighed less than the folder she held, and the folder felt like a key. We open the shaft and record what the world does, she said. Ethan said, If it roars, she said. We answer. The pulse fell to a gentle knock, as if the lake were nodding, and the skiff drifted toward the dark circle that had waited all along. The shaft hatch fought their hands, metal cold and slick, while the lake throbbed like a slow drum above them. Breath made ghosts in the dark, and the ladder rattled with each step. Mara counted pulses as if they were seconds between storms. Ethan said, Footsteps on the pier, she said. Down. The hum rose from the rock, thinner now like a wire about to snap. Lights flickered in the tunnel, and shadows ran ahead like messengers who knew bad news. The deeper door waited, paint blistered, bolts scarred by old tools. Conrad's voice drifted down the shaft, calm and close. Conrad Vale said, "Do not touch the relay," she said. "We already did." The relay room answered with a bright click that felt like a held breath letting go. Ethan said, "We are past the point." The floor trembled. Between pulses, a whisper formed one word that sounded like a name. They entered the relay chamber where rings of metal embraced a basalt spine, each coil humming with patient power. The air tasted like copper and rain, and the floor shook in tiny waves that climbed through their legs. Conrad stepped in behind them, hands open, voice steady. Conrad Vale said, "The array holds the fault asleep," Mara said. "It holds the town asleep," he said. "Sleep is mercy," she said. "Not when bought with silence." The argument cracked like ice under weight. Ethan raised the recorder and set markers on the tone, cutting the rhythm into clean steps. The coils brightened as if listening to them, not the lake. Sparks feathered the edges of the frame, and the hum rose to meet their pulse. Conrad said, "Switch that, and you bury us." Mara said, "Or free us." The relay clicked again, waiting for a hand, hers or his. The panel blew when Mara flipped the interlock. Flash white, thunder trapped in a small room. Heat threw her backward, and Ethan lunged to hold a bypass lever that refused to lock. His face tightened, but his voice stayed even. Ethan said, "Record this," she said. "Let go," he said. "Not yet." The chamber dimmed and a soft roar swelled through the rock, old and deep, like the earth clearing its throat after a long sleep. Time slowed to breaths and small sounds. A drop of water fell from the ceiling and shattered on the floor like glass. Mara said, "Tell me when," he said, "when your hand stops shaking." She forced calm and traced the coil pattern Sister Helena taught in daylight on the hill. The relay found a lower cadence and the lever groaned into place. Ethan slumped, burned sleeve, smoking, eyes bright with pain and relief. Cost counted itself. Conrad stepped between them and the core, face lit by the low glow, and for a second he looked tired rather than cruel. Conrad Vale said, "I kept this town breathing," she said. "By taking its voice," he said. "I took its nightmares," she said. "You took its truth." The rhythm ran under their words like a river under ice. Mara moved left and felt the hum change with her position. A map written in sound. She reached for the main shunt while Ethan braced the lever with his shoulder. Conrad caught her wrist, gentle, firm. The pause filled with every loss written in the logs. She said, "Aurora did not agree," he said. "Aurora built the last note." The line sounded like love and regret tied in one knot. She twisted free and drove the shunt home. The coils dimmed and the lake above answered with a long, clean exhale. Silence returned, not empty but full, like a theater after the last note. The chamber held its breath with them, then settled into small pops and ticking metal. Mara felt the town above in that hush, streets and windows and beds that did not know what had changed. Ethan said, "We are still here," she said. "So is the truth." Conrad looked at the coils as if seeing a gravestone with his own name. He said, "If the fault wakes, it is on you," she said. "If it sleeps, it is by choice." She lifted the recorder and spoke for the record with a calm she had to build from broken parts. "Array offline," she said. "Lake stable, source independent." A trickle of water ran along the floor and found a drain like a new path remembering itself. Above them, the pulse faded to a gentle tide. The air felt lighter, and the way forward opened like a door. Silence settled over the shaft like soft ash, and the world seemed to breathe for the first time in years. Drips counted the seconds as steam thinned, and Mara traced the outline of her recorder with a thumb that finally stopped shaking. Ethan said, "We did it." She let the words drift and land where the echoes used to live. The air held the taste of metal and damp stone, calmer now, like a room after a long argument. She listened for the old pulse and heard only a slow, natural tide returning through the rock. Relief did not feel like victory. It felt like a debt that would take a life to pay. Conrad stood apart, eyes on the dim coils, a man measuring the cost in private. She thought of the boy who never slept and of Aurora's last breath on tape. She understood the weight of choosing. Something dear had gone quiet. They climbed into dawn that tasted of pine and cold lake air, and the sky wore a thin band of rose over gray water. On the dock, Mara sat with knees drawn close and let memory play in short flashes like frames from a film. Aurora Pike said, "It isn't natural, it's nested," Sister Helena said. "Follow when the pulse slows." Ethan set a hand near hers, not touching, close enough to steady the space between breaths. Guilt rose and shaped itself into questions that would never be answered cleanly. She whispered, "I broke a lullaby." Ethan said, "You broke a cage." The words did not cancel each other. They collided and became something rough but true. A gull called once and kept flying. The lake lapped like careful applause. Life would continue, but it would not be the same song. She accepted the change as a tide that would not turn back. Mid-morning light slid across the cabin wall and paused on the old reel recorder, and time slowed until breath and dust shared one rhythm. Mara pressed play and waited for Aurora's voice to rise from the ribbon like a tide remembering shore. The voice arrived clear and close, carrying fear and a steady kind of love for the work. Aurora Pike said, "If someone hears this, let the lake decide." The words softened the hard parts of Mara's chest and left them strong instead of brittle. Ethan said nothing, and that silence helped more than talk could. Mara said, "I hear you." The sound of the lake outside matched the tape for a beat, then drifted slightly, like a promise kept but not repeated. Forgiveness felt like a door left open at the end of a long hallway. She let it stand open and stepped past the ache. The Abbey Hill held a soft wind, and the smell of wet sage and clouds moved like slow thoughts over the broken arches. In the shade by the well, a parcel waited with a note in clean script that read, "For the keeper of honest records." Inside lay a small brass token stamped with concentric circles, and a page torn from a ledger. Sister Helena had written, "A chorus is not a cage if all can leave." Mara traced the ink and heard those words echo, as if the bells had returned for a single ring. Ethan said, "She knew you'd come," she said. "She knew I had to." Past lessons braided with the day's truth until the knot held without choking. The wind shifted and dried one tear she did not hide. She allowed herself a small smile that felt like sunrise under the skin. Near sunset, the town gathered by the water with an ordinary noise that sounded brave, and boats rocked in a rhythm not set by any machine. Mara stood at the pier microphone and spoke the facts without decoration. She said, "The array is offline. The lake holds." Conrad stood apart, listening with the poise of someone accepting a verdict he once wrote for others. Ethan said, "We go on," she said. "We go on." The words sent no cheer through the crowd, only a deeper breath that changed them quietly. She set the token on the pier post like a marker, then pressed stop on the recorder and felt no need to press play again. The sky lowered into a calm blue, and lights came on in windows, as if the lake had taught them patience. The choice was made, and it pointed toward morning. Morning held stillness like a held note, and the lake answered with a plain tone made only of wind and small waves. Mara walked the dock and counted loose boards as if taking inventory of a life. She thought of what the array had stolen and what the truth had returned with open hands. Ethan said, "You look lighter," she said. "I feel heavier in the right places." A heron stood in the shallows and blinked, then stayed as if to bless ordinary time. She tasted coffee that had cooled and found it good anyway. Loss sat beside her like an honest friend who does not need to speak. The town sounded quieter, not empty, just careful. She asked the morning a small question because it had room for one. Was it worth it, she wondered, and the answer did not come as words. It came as breath that did not hurt. She carried the last sealed tape to the library and placed it beside the ledger, then signed a simple line with a steady hand. The action felt like returning a compass to a map. Ethan said, "We keep copies, we share the rest," she said. Transparency is the anchor. Sunlight moved across the floorboards and pulled shadows forward like a tide. She walked out slowly, listening to her steps transform from echo to open air. The town clock chimed once, a reminder rather than a command. She did not look back at the door. She allowed it to become memory while still warm. On the street, a child laughed and the sound dissolved the last corner of dread. She followed the sound until it faded into the day, leaving a line of quiet resolve where fear used to live. Back at the cabin, she opened the folder named Aurora one last time and found a short note hidden in the metadata. A voice left like a light in a window. Aurora Pike said, "If truth survives me, let it belong to the water." The words arrived as a soft voice in the room, though no speaker played, and the lake answered by brushing the shore in slow applause. Mara closed her eyes and let the lines settle into the spine of the story she would keep writing in plain language. Ethan said, "Well, publish," she said. "Well, listen first." The theme of the work had changed without changing its name. She saved the file and did not lock it. Memory held. The cabin exhaled. She believed the message had found its current. Days turned, and the town learned a new rhythm without instruction. Boats launched later, nets came up cleaner, and people paused to watch the water without fear of what sang beneath. Conrad walked the pier each evening and counted pilings, and some nights he nodded to Mara without speaking. Sister Helena's note hung framed in the cafe, where steam drew lines on glass like fresh handwriting. The story shrank to fit ordinary rooms and stayed strong there. "Gratitude," someone said, and it landed softly, not as a cheer but as a steadying hand on a shoulder. Change did not arrive as a banner. It arrived as a habit. The world acknowledged what had been done, and then kept moving as it must. On a ridge above the lake, Mara stood where wind brushed grass flat and sky opened like a book. She held no recorder and made no notes. She said, "Truth must never be owned." The words felt light and exact, and they did not need an answer. Ethan said, "Then we'll keep it moving." She let silence complete the line and watched the water take the day into itself without complaint. Somewhere beyond the hills, a second quiet waited that might someday speak. She did not fear it. She carried the space to listen and the will to ask. The story did not close. It found a place to rest until called again. She turned toward the path and walked.